At one point, you just stopped appearing on The Tonight Show.
I did?
Yeah.
You know, I think they banned me.
Because?
Because I walked out on This Is Your Life.
You may be the only person to have ever done this.
I am.
What happened?
Everyone and their grandma thinks that they know Ricky Nelson's story. The clean-cut teen idol, the rock and roll sensation, the golden boy who seemed to have it all. But according to one of the people who knew him best, that image barely scratched the surface. Decades after the cameras stopped rolling, Angie Dickinson finally opened up about the Ricky Nelson the public never saw. And what she revealed raises a question that fans have been missing for years. Was America's favorite heartthrob living a very different life behind the scenes? Stick around, because this story takes a turn most people never saw coming. Who exactly was Ricky Nelson, and why did everyone lose their minds over him? Before we get into what Angie said, we need to set the scene. Because if you weren't alive in the late 1950s, it's genuinely hard to grasp just how massive Ricky Nelson was. Like, we're not talking, oh yeah, I think I've heard that name famous. We're talking Elvis-level hysteria. We're talking teenage girls writing fan letters by the thousands. We're talking a kid so wildly popular that the term teen idol was literally invented to describe him. His full name was Eric Hilliard Nelson, born May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey. And he essentially grew up in front of America's living rooms. From the age of 8, he was performing on the radio sitcom The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet alongside his real-life family. And when that show made the jump to television in 1952, suddenly, little Ricky Nelson was in millions of American homes every single week, playing himself as the cheeky, charming younger son of Ozzie and Harriet Nelson. Now, here's where it gets wild. In 1957, at just 17 years old, Ricky picked up a guitar at the end of a show episode and performed a rock and roll song, I'm Walkin', originally by Fats Domino, and the reaction was absolutely unhinged. He got a record deal almost immediately. His debut album, simply titled Ricky, hit #1 on the charts. And then the hits just kept coming. We're talking Bebop Baby, Stood Up, Lonesome Town, Never Be Anyone Else But You, Hello Mary Lou, and then, on August 4th, 1958, Poor Little Fool became the very first #1 song on Billboard's brand new Hot 100 chart. The first. Not one of the first. The first. That's like being the first person to summit Everest. That's a record that doesn't go away. Between 1958 and 1959, Ricky Nelson had more top 40 hits than Elvis Presley. Think about that for a second. More than Elvis. The kid with the TV show and the slicked hair and the squeaky clean image was actually out-charting the king of rock and roll. By 1960, the Ricky Nelson International Fan Club had thousands of chapters worldwide. Thousands! And yet, and this is key, despite all of this, Ricky Nelson had a reputation for being incredibly quiet about his fame. He wasn't the type to walk into a room demanding attention. He wasn't throwing parties at the Hollywood Hills or getting into tabloid scandals. He showed up, he performed, and by most accounts, he went home. But what was he actually like behind the scenes? That's what everyone's been dying to know. So when Hollywood legend Angie Dickinson, a woman who spent months on a film set with him at the absolute peak of his fame, finally opened up about what Ricky Nelson was really like, well, let's just say it tells you everything. But first, who exactly is Angie Dickinson, and why should you care what she has to say? Angie Dickinson, the woman who saw it all. If you don't know Angie Dickinson, you should absolutely fix that immediately, because she is one of Hollywood's most underrated icons. Born Angeline Brown on September 30th, 1931, in Coulomb, North Dakota, Dickinson's path into Hollywood is the kind of story that sounds like it was made up, because it's almost too good. She was working at an airplane factory when she got a call asking if she wanted to appear in a promotional bit for the Jimmy Durante show. She said yes, showed up, and in the process, she spotted a young Frank Sinatra working on the set. That chance encounter essentially lit a fire in her. She wanted to be in that world. And so, she pursued it. By the mid-1950s, she was picking up television roles, and by 1959, she had landed one of the most coveted parts in one of the most talked-about films of the year. She was cast as Feathers, a sharp-tongued, fiercely independent card dealer in Howard Hawks' Western epic Rio Bravo. And her co-stars? Oh, just a casual little lineup, including John Wayne, Dean Martin, Walter Brennan, and a certain 18-year-old rock and roll superstar named Ricky Nelson. Dickinson would go on to have a legendary career with over 350 screen credits, including Ocean's 11, the 1960 original, Point Blank, and Dressed to Kill. She became one of the most recognizable faces on television with Policewoman. Frank Sinatra remained a lifelong friend. She rubbed elbows with the biggest names in the business for decades. So when Angie Dickinson speaks about Ricky Nelson, she's not doing it from some place of nostalgia and hero worship. She's doing it from a position of someone who has seen everything Hollywood has to offer: the ego, the excess, the entitlement, and can clearly tell the difference between someone who's the real deal and someone who's just playing a part. Which makes what she says about Ricky Nelson all the more striking, because what Angie Dickinson describes is someone who stood out in a town absolutely overflowing with enormous egos. So what did she actually see on that set in 1958? Let's get into it. The Rio Bravo set, a clash of worlds. It's 1958. You're on a film set in the scorching Arizona desert. Filming was done at Old Tucson Studios, with more than 100 carpenters and craftsmen from Warner Brothers brought in to build out the sets, including jails, saloons, and hotels. The director is Howard Hawks, a legendary, exacting filmmaker who was making this movie partly as a personal response to films he considered too preachy, specifically High Noon and 3:10 to Yuma. Hawks wanted something looser, more character-driven, more fun. The cast he assembled was, to put it mildly, a lot. John Wayne was 51 years old, already one of the biggest movie stars in American history, and, as Dickinson later recalled in a Variety interview, was genuinely nervous about some of his romantic scenes with her because of their 25-year age gap. Dean Martin was fresh off his split with Jerry Lewis, trying to prove he could carry a film on his own. Walter Brennan was a 3-time Oscar winner and Hollywood royalty. And then there was Ricky Nelson, 18 years old, a kid who, by this point, had more hit songs than almost anyone on the planet, was on television every week in front of millions of viewers, and had a fan club with 9,000 chapters around the world. He was cast as Colorado Ryan, a young expert gunslinger who initially resists getting involved in the film's central conflict before ultimately becoming one of the heroes. Here's the thing that makes this interesting. Ricky Nelson had virtually no serious acting experience outside of the family sitcom. He was playing himself, essentially, on Ozzie and Harriet. Now he was stepping into a big, serious Western with legends of the screen, directed by one of the most demanding directors in Hollywood. The pressure would have been enormous, and he got the part largely because of his fame. John Wayne himself reportedly felt that Ricky's presence would bring in younger audiences, and Wayne was right. Rio Bravo became the highest-grossing Western of 1959, raking in over $10.5 million. Wayne later credited much of the film's popularity to Ricky Nelson's involvement. So here you have this teenage megastar dropped into one of the most high-pressure film sets of the year, surrounded by legends, with the entire industry watching to see if he could hack it. What does he do? If you're expecting a story about a diva throwing tantrums, demanding special treatment, or being impossible to work with, you're about to be seriously surprised. Because according to Angie Dickinson, what happened on that set was something far more unexpected. What Angie Dickinson actually revealed, the secret side of Ricky Nelson. Here's where we get to the good stuff. Because Angie Dickinson's account of Ricky Nelson isn't a scandal. It's not a bombshell in the traditional sense, but in a weird way it's actually more surprising than if it had been. Because what she describes is a young man who, at the absolute height of his fame, chose to be genuinely, almost stubbornly normal. And in Hollywood, that's the rarest thing of all. According to Dickinson, Ricky Nelson never once acted like a star on the set of Rio Bravo. Think about what that means for a second. This kid had more top 40 hits than Elvis. He was on national television every week. He had 9,000 fan club chapters. He was 18 years old and arguably the most famous teenager in America. And he showed up to work like he was just a guy. A regular, curious, respectful, hard-working guy. He didn't demand a bigger trailer. He didn't show up late expecting people to cater to him. He didn't hang exclusively with the famous members of the cast or treat the crew like furniture. Dickinson specifically noted how Ricky spent time with everyone on set, not just the marquee names, the grips, the extras, the stunt performers, the people whose names would never appear in a review or on a poster, but who showed up every single day and made the film happen behind the scenes. Ricky Nelson actually saw those people. He talked to them. He asked them about their jobs. He was curious about how everything worked. Can you imagine? Here is a kid who could have spent every break in his trailer being waited on, who instead was wandering around the set asking the stunt team how they pulled off certain moves, genuinely wanting to learn. That kind of humility, that kind of real humility, not the performed kind, is vanishingly rare in someone at that level of fame. And then there was the guitar. Between scenes, Ricky would find a quiet corner and just strum, quietly, to himself. Not performing, not seeking attention, just playing, the way musicians do when music is genuinely part of who they are, rather than something they've manufactured for an image. Dickinson found this quality in him genuinely disarming. Here was this massive rock star who didn't need to be on every second. He was comfortable in his own skin in a way that a lot of much older, much more seasoned performers simply weren't. Dickinson also spoke about how Ricky approached the actual work of acting. This is where a lot of people might have expected the story to go sideways. The inexperienced young star struggling under the weight of a serious film, maybe relying on his fame rather than his craft. But that's not what happened. Ricky was, by Dickinson's account, completely dialed in. He took every scene seriously. He listened to Howard Hawks. He welcomed feedback, even when it required reshooting or rethinking an approach. He put in the work, and it showed. Ricky's performance in Rio Bravo earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Most Promising Male Newcomer in 1959. That's not a courtesy nomination. That's a recognition that when the cameras rolled, something real was happening. The overall picture Dickinson paints is of someone with what she described as a gentle spirit, a quiet confidence, and an unexpected sense of humor. Three things that don't always coexist, and that are especially rare in someone who has been famous their entire conscious life. Because remember, Ricky Nelson didn't become famous at 18. He had been in front of audiences since he was 8 years old. He'd been performing since childhood. He'd had a decade's worth of public attention before Rio Bravo ever started filming. And somehow, through all of it, he had not become the person that environment tends to create. He had not become entitled. He had not become detached. He had not learned to treat people as props in his own story. That, according to Angie Dickinson, was Ricky Nelson's secret side. Not a dark secret, not a hidden scandal. Just the quiet, genuine decency of a person who refused to let fame make him smaller. And honestly, that's probably why Angie's memories hit so differently today. Because we're living in an era where celebrity culture is built on visibility. Everyone is performing all the time. Every meal is photographed. Every opinion is broadcast. Every interaction feels designed for an audience. Ricky Nelson came from a completely different world. According to Dickinson's recollections, he wasn't interested in turning every moment into a performance. He wasn't trying to convince people he was humble. He simply behaved that way when nobody was looking. That's what makes her observations so valuable. These weren't comments made during a publicity tour. They weren't crafted for a magazine profile. These were memories of what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. And sometimes, that's where you learn the most about a person. Not from how they act in front of fans, but from how they treat people who have nothing to offer them in return. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, okay, he was a nice guy on a film set. So what? People are nice sometimes. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a one-time observation from one person. Everything we know about Ricky Nelson from multiple sources seems to tell the same story. So who was this guy, really? And how did someone that famous stay that grounded? The real Ricky Nelson, piecing together the full picture. Let's zoom out a little, because Angie Dickinson's account doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a broader portrait of a person who, by all accounts, genuinely didn't let his fame define him in the ways Hollywood usually demands. Ricky Nelson grew up in the most public way imaginable. He was not just a famous kid. He was a kid whose family literally broadcast their lives on national radio and then television. His childhood, his adolescence, his early romances, his early embarrassments, all of it played out in front of an audience. Most people in that situation either run as hard as they can from the spotlight or become completely consumed by it. Ricky Nelson somehow managed to do neither. His music career is a perfect example of this. Yes, he was packaged as a teen idol. Yes, Ozzie Nelson was savvy enough to leverage Ricky's television platform to launch his recording career. But what makes Ricky Nelson genuinely interesting, historically speaking, is that the music was real. When rock scholars and music historians look back at the late 1950s, Nelson's name comes up again and again, not just as a commercial phenomenon, but as an actual musical innovator. Elvis said he was an influence. Bob Dylan said so. Johnny Cash said so. John Fogerty, when Nelson was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987, told the audience that Nelson was a major influence on early rock music. He assembled one of the sharpest bands of the era, including guitarist James Burton, who would later play with Elvis Presley, and created a sound that blended rockabilly, pop, and country in ways that most of his contemporaries couldn't touch. He had 54 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 between 1957 and 1973, 30 top 40 hits between 1957 and 1962, more than everyone except Elvis and Pat Boone. But here's the other side of that coin. By the mid-1960s, Ricky Nelson had aged out of the teen idol market, and the British invasion had completely reshaped the musical landscape. The wholesome family sitcom image that had launched his career started working against him in the grittier rock culture that was emerging. He reinvented himself, moving toward country rock. He was genuinely pioneering in that space too, but the mainstream audience had moved on. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but it came posthumously. Because on December 31st, 1985, on the last day of a year that had already been the deadliest in U.S. aviation history, Ricky Nelson boarded a Douglas DC-3 in Guntersville, Alabama, headed for a New Year's Eve performance in Dallas. He was 45 years old. The plane caught fire mid-flight from a suspected faulty cabin heater. The pilot survived by escaping through the cockpit windows. All 7 passengers, including Ricky Nelson, his fiancée Helen Blair, and 5 members of his band, did not. He was 45 years old. His music career had spanned nearly 3 decades, and he still had a fan base, still had the chops, still had that same love for performing that had driven him since he was a kid, strumming a guitar in front of a television camera. What's fascinating is that Ricky Nelson spent much of his career fighting assumptions. Critics often looked at him and saw the TV kid, the teen idol, the pretty face. What they didn't always see was the musician who was constantly trying to evolve. He wasn't content to simply repeat the formula that made him famous. He kept experimenting with sounds, collaborating with talented players, and pushing into new territory even when it wasn't the safest commercial decision. In hindsight, that's often the mark of an artist rather than a celebrity. Celebrities tend to protect what's working. Artists take risks, even when those risks confuse people. Looking back now, many music historians argue that Ricky Nelson deserves far more credit than he received during his lifetime for helping shape the direction of American popular music. The tragedy of Ricky Nelson is not just that he died young, it's that he died as someone who had spent his entire life being misread. First packaged as a teen idol when he was actually a serious musician, then dismissed as a relic when he was actually innovating, then mostly forgotten by the mainstream when he was actually still great. It took a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction and the passage of decades for the culture to catch up to what he actually was. And maybe that's exactly why Angie Dickinson's words matter so much right now. Because she's not just remembering a co-star, she's filling in a gap in our understanding of who Ricky Nelson actually was as a human being. And when you put what she says alongside everything else we know about him, something really beautiful comes into focus. So, what's the takeaway here? What does all of this mean? What Ricky Nelson's legacy really looks like. Here's the thing about Ricky Nelson that keeps nagging at me the more I dig into this story. We live in a culture that is absolutely obsessed with the idea that fame reveals who you really are. That success strips away the mask and shows the monster, or the saint, underneath. We love a rags-to-riches story, but we love a corruption of success story even more. Ricky Nelson doesn't fit that narrative at all. He was never a rags-to-riches story. He grew up in a showbiz family, launched into fame with every advantage a family platform could offer. So we can't romanticize the scrappy underdog. But he also wasn't a cautionary tale about celebrity gone wrong. He wasn't a tragic overdose story or a breakdown in public. He didn't become a monster. He became a middle-aged musician who was still touring, still performing, still genuinely loving music, 40 years in. What Angie Dickinson gives us with her memories is something more subtle and, honestly, more interesting than either of those familiar stories. She gives us a portrait of someone who absorbed an enormous amount of fame and pressure from a very young age and just remained decent, remained curious, remained kind. Think about what that actually requires. When you are famous from childhood, everyone around you has an incentive to treat you differently. People tell you you're special. People make accommodations. People let things slide. The world shapes itself around your presence in ways that make it very, very easy to start believing that you are actually more important than everyone else, that your time matters more, that your comfort matters more, that your needs matter more. Ricky Nelson, by all evidence, genuinely did not believe that. He sat with the crew. He strummed his guitar quietly between takes rather than demanding entertainment. He listened to his director. He asked the stunt team how they did their jobs. These are not the behaviors of someone performing humility for the cameras. These are the behaviors of someone who was actually humble. And that is genuinely, genuinely rare. Angie Dickinson, who has seen more of Hollywood than almost anyone still walking around, has described Ricky Nelson's gentle spirit, quiet confidence, and unexpected humor as making the filming of Rio Bravo genuinely unforgettable. That is not a throwaway compliment. That is a woman with over 350 screen credits. Someone who worked with John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, Rock Hudson, Dean Martin. Brian De Palma saying that the 18-year-old rock and roll star left a mark on her that she's still thinking about decades later. Ricky Nelson was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. He had 54 songs on the Billboard Hot 100. He was a pioneering force in country rock. He earned a Golden Globe nomination for his very first serious film role. The public image of Ricky Nelson, the perfectly groomed teen idol singing on the family TV show, always had a flattening effect on who he actually was. It made him easy to dismiss as a product, a manufactured celebrity, a pretty face propped up by his family's platform. But the more you look at the actual record, the more that image falls apart. The music was real. The craft was real. And the character, as Angie Dickinson finally makes clear, was very, very real. He deserved better from the culture than he got. He deserved to be remembered not just as a footnote in the teen idol era, but as a genuinely talented, genuinely decent human being who happened to also be extraordinarily famous. And maybe that's what this story is really about. Not a scandal, not a revelation that tears down an icon, but a reminder from someone who was actually there, who actually knew him, that sometimes the most surprising thing a famous person can be is simply, quietly, good. So what do you think about all of this? Does knowing about Ricky Nelson's real personality change how you see him? And is there another classic Hollywood star whose off-screen life you think the world doesn't really understand? Because honestly, I think we've only scratched the surface. Angie Dickinson at 94, still sharp, still speaking truth. One more thing worth mentioning here, because it adds a layer to this whole story. Angie Dickinson is, as of this filming, in her 90s. She was born in 1931. She has been in this industry longer than most of the people watching this video have been alive. She appeared at the TCM Film Festival to introduce a 4K restoration of Rio Bravo, which, by the way, was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress in 2014 for its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. This is not a forgotten movie. This is a film that the Library of Congress decided was important enough to protect for future generations. And Angie Dickinson is still out there talking about it. Still sharp, still funny, still carrying these memories with her and willing to share them. There's something really moving about that. She could have spent her years just resting on her legacy. And what a legacy it is. Instead, she's still showing up to film festivals, still doing interviews, still telling the stories that deserve to be told, including this one. When someone at that stage of life with that much experience tells you that a particular person left a lasting impression on them, you listen. Because she has had 70+ years to forget about people who weren't worth remembering. The fact that Ricky Nelson is still someone she talks about, still someone whose memory she carries with warmth and specificity, tells you something profound about the kind of mark he left. He was 18 years old on that set. She was 27. The movie they made together became one of the most beloved westerns in American film history. And 6.5 decades later, she's still thinking about the way he quietly strummed his guitar between scenes and made time for everyone around him. That's a legacy. That's what it looks like when a person actually matters to the people around them, not the chart positions, not the screaming fans, not the magazine covers. The person who, decades later, makes someone smile just by remembering them. So, what do you think? Did you grow up knowing Ricky Nelson? Or was this your first real introduction to him? If it's the latter, I hope this video inspires you to explore his incredible legacy. Listen to Hello Mary Lou, watch Rio Bravo, and take a closer look at how he helped shape country rock years before it became a recognized genre. Ricky's story is a reminder that the truth behind a public image is often far more interesting than the headlines. If you enjoy uncovering the real stories behind classic Hollywood legends, the triumphs, struggles, and forgotten chapters that history tends to overlook, then you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive. We've got plenty more fascinating stories about Hollywood's most iconic figures coming your way. And let us know in the comments, which classic star should we explore next? There are so many remarkable stories still waiting to be told. If you found this video interesting, helpful, or simply entertaining, share it with someone who loves old Hollywood, remembers Ricky Nelson, or appreciates a great story. These stories deserve to be remembered and passed on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.